Hello and welcome to Countries That Used to Exist. Today we'll be talking about the short-lived state of the Republic of Texas, a Mexican breakaway founded by Americans on the 2nd of March 1836. This country existed for just a hair under 10 years, before being willingly annexed by the United States in February 1846. Texas was first colonized by Spain in the late 17th century, but remained a sparsely populated backwater for the next few centuries. Just a distant province of Mexico that was subject to Indian incursions and with few resources that couldn't be found elsewhere. In the early 19th century, Texas faced numerous incursions from American pioneers who attempted to establish an independent republic in the area. These efforts never amounted to much, and when Mexico achieved independence from Spain in 1821, Texas came with it as a constituent territory. In an effort to populate Mexico and provide a barrier between the Comanche Indians and the heartland, the Mexican government appointed the American Moses Austin as a sort of manager of Texas in 1821, and he was tasked with finding families of Americans willing to move to Texas and distributing land to them for a low cost. Moses immediately died, but luckily his son Stephen, who was more than willing to take over where his dad left off, began selling land to Americans at 12 cents an acre, or about $3 today. To sweeten the deal, these people would be exempt from taxation for a period of several years. The only condition was that the settlers be Catholics of good standing in the community, and that they be dedicated to improving the land and becoming citizens of Mexico. Over the next few years, Stephen Austin sold land to almost 300 families, which became known as the Old 300, and formed the basis of modern Texan culture, as well as the foundation of the Republic. Almost immediately, however, there was tension between the new colonists and the Mexican government. Austin recruited the majority of the Americans from the southern states, which made them very pro-slavery. Also, Austin didn't want Texas to be settled by a rabble and was very selective with the families he chose. They were an overwhelmingly wealthy bunch, and many of them brought slaves they already owned from America. This was awkward for the Mexican government, as it had been steadily moving away from slavery since independence, even proclaiming in 1821 that all inhabitants, without any distinction other than merit and virtue, are citizens fit for whatever employment they choose. When slavery was finally abolished in 1829, the Texans were unwilling to surrender their slaves, who even at this early point made up over a quarter of the Texan population. The settlers simply ignored the law and changed their slaves to indentured servants with indefinite contracts. Also, Austin hadn't been entirely honest with the government when he was recruiting the settlers. The vast majority of them were not Catholics, but Protestants who were unhappy being ruled by Catholics. As the colonists became more and more successful, Texas was increasingly seen as a land of opportunity for Americans. The Mexican government was weak and unable to exert much influence over the province, and land was cheap and fertile. Americans began flooding into Texas, and the population exploded. By 1830, the American population of Texas numbered around 25,000, not counting the slaves. This dramatically outnumbered the Mexicans, and the Mexican government began to fear, rightfully as it would turn out, that the Americans would take over the territory completely. The Mexican government passed a law that forbid any American immigrants from settling in Texas or any other Mexican frontier. This was respectfully ignored by the Americans, and immigrants continued to arrive. The law was eventually repealed, but the fact that it had existed at all annoyed the new immigrants, and the ideas of Texan independence began to take hold. In 1834, former President and General Santa Anna overthrew the government of Mexico in a coup and installed himself as president once more. The next year, Santa Anna overturned the constitution and attempted to centralize Mexico around Mexico City. The new dictatorship was incredibly unpopular. Revolts and secessionist movements cropped up all over Mexico, and Texas was no exception. In order to reassert control, Santa Anna sent General Martin Perfecto de Cos to San Antonio with around 400 soldiers. Mexican troops tried to seize a cannon held by the town of Gonzales. The local Texan militia went out to confront the troops, taunting them with the phrase, "Come and take it." The militia was able to rout the Mexicans in what became known as the Battle of Gonzales, though only 2 people died. Numerous smaller skirmishes were fought in the coming months, and the Texan Revolutionary Army began to form under the leadership of Austin. This army took the fight to the Mexican government in San Antonio, and after a siege forced the Mexicans to surrender. Humiliated, the Mexicans were then paroled and withdrew behind the Rio Grande. Having had his forces defeated, Santa Anna was enraged. In 1836, he personally led an army of around 7,000 north into Texas to try and crush the revolting Americans, choosing San Antonio as his target to avenge the defeat that had been inflicted there. The Texans chose to defend the city from the compound of the Alamo Mission Station. A large proportion of these men were volunteers from the United States, further cementing the American influence that would be prevalent throughout Texas. The Battle of the Alamo, of Remember the Alamo fame, was the result. The defenders of the Alamo endured a short siege before being killed to the man in an assault on the 6th of March. Meanwhile, a convention was being held in Washington on the Brazos, which is only a small town today, but once birthed a nation. Delegates from across Texas had gathered there to discuss independence. Though interestingly, most of these delegates were not even Mexican citizens and had only recently arrived in Texas from the east. A full quarter of the delegates had only arrived in the country within the previous year. Only a few of them had lived in Texas for more than 10. On the 2nd of March, the Texan Declaration of Independence was adopted and signed by all 59 delegates at the convention. A short time later, a constitution had been written and signed as well. Unsurprisingly, this constitution was heavily inspired by the one of the United States, with a President, Senate, and House of Representatives, though there were some notable differences. The President could only serve a 3-year term. Multiple terms were allowed but could not be consecutive. The right to own slaves was guaranteed. Indians, Africans, and any descendants of either were forbidden from citizenship. All males aged 21 and over also had the right to vote and were entitled to 1/3 of a league of land. At the convention, David Burnett was elected the interim president of the newly formed Republic of Texas, while Lorenzo de Zavala was elected vice president. Any celebration was short-lived, however, as Santa Anna and his army was bearing down on the convention after having taken San Antonio. The newly commissioned head of the army, Sam Houston, led the army north and prepared to meet Santa Anna in a surprise attack when the opportunity presented itself. On the 21st of April, the chance finally arrived, and the 900-man-strong Texan army attacked the Mexican army while they rested. In only 18 minutes, over 600 Mexicans had been killed, while the rest were taken prisoner. Texas lost only a dozen or so men in the battle, and Santa Anna managed to escape but was captured a few days later. With the president himself now in Texan hands, he was forced to sign a treaty recognizing the independence of the republic. Texas really by rights shouldn't have won this war. It had a tiny population, no navy, and very little artillery. Capturing Santa Anna and forcing him into a peace treaty is frankly one of the most bizarre strokes of luck in American history. But the republic had been founded and secured nonetheless. It was really, really dumb, but it still happened. Having achieved independence in 1836, the republic would operate as a sovereign nation for the next decade until it voted for annexation by the United States. In October 1836, Sam Houston was elected president with over 5,000 votes and became the first true leader of the republic. When the country achieved independence, it had a population of only around 40,000 people, including its slaves, though the Indian tribes in the country brought this number up to around 50,000. Its borders are also rather difficult to define. Texas and Mexico put their boundaries in different places, with the Texans claiming territory all the way to the Rio Grande and into Oklahoma and New Mexico, while the Mexican government claimed the majority of these lands themselves. As such, effective Texan control was restricted to the eastern parts of the state where the American settlers had been able to establish themselves. The bonny blue flag was adopted as the symbol of the nation until 1839, when it was changed to the more famous Lone Star. Internally, Texas was divided politically between those who wished to join the United States and those who felt that Texas should seek out its own destiny as an independent nation. The annexation movement was supported by Sam Houston himself, who had always felt that Texas would be better suited to joining the United States. Those advocating for an independent Texas rallied around the vice president and war hero Mirabeau Lamar. For the first few years of Texan independence, things were mostly quiet. The population grew from immigration and the economy steadily expanded. In 1838, Houston's first term ended, and Lamar took office with a landslide 96.5% of the popular vote, mostly due to no one knowing who his rival was. If you're interested, his name was Robert Wilson, and he won a stunning 252 votes in total. I honestly cannot find a picture of him. Lamar believed firmly that Texas should remain an independent state despite this being the minority view at the time. At the start of his term, he declared that he would see the Cherokee and Comanche tribes driven from Texas or destroyed entirely. He would establish a national bank, and he would secure recognition from the European powers. Finally, he would expand the borders of Texas to ensure the country had a prosperous future. With all this in mind, his term was not a success. The first thing Lamar did was engage in a war against the Indian tribes, vowing to remove what he called Houston's pet Indians. This war mostly involved chasing down groups of Indians who would rather be left alone, and by the end of Lamar's term, East Texas had been almost entirely cleared of the tribes through threats and massacres. He failed in his efforts to achieve recognition from Europe, and he was also refused loans. As such, the Texan Redback was issued for the first time in order to fund the wars and expansion. These notes collapsed basically immediately through massive inflation and a lack of backing. Things got so bad that by the end of Lamar's term, the Texan Congress itself refused to accept the Texan dollar as a way of paying taxes. Just before the end of Lamar's term, he equipped an expedition of men using money he had taken illegally from the Treasury. The point of the expedition was to get to Santa Fe in New Mexico and convince the locals to join the Republic, thereby expanding Texan borders. This expedition was almost immediately captured by the Mexican army and caused a diplomatic incident. At the end of Lamar's term, the economy had collapsed, the country was $7 million in debt, and it had been humiliated. Sam Houston was elected president once more in 1841 and took office vowing to join the United States. At the same time, U.S. President John Tyler sought to protect slave interests through expansion, and negotiations began between the two. On the 1st of March 1845, the United States made an official offer of annexation, which was accepted. Finally, on the 18th of February 1846, Texas officially joined the United States with overwhelming popular support. Anson Jones, the last president of the Republic, said as the Texan flag was lowered and the American flag was raised, that the final act of this great drama is now performed. The Republic of Texas is no more.